Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. First, I will introduce myself. My name is Siti Nur Hidayah from the Department of Economic Education, Jakarta State University. Here, I will presentation my research proposal seminar entitled The Influence of Interest in Learning, Learning Motivation, and Emotional Intelligence on Student Achievement in Financial Accounting subject in 46 Vocational High School Jakarta. Before I start the presentation, I would like to thank you to Ms. Dra. Sri Zulaihati M.Si as my first supervisor and Ms. Ati Sumiati S.Pd M.Si as my second supervisor is doing this research. First is Chapter 1 regarding the introduction. In Chapter 1, there are background problem formation, research novelty, and research objectivity. First, the background of the problem. The background of the problem is the progress of science and technology. Advance in science and technology lead to change in society. This change has resulted in social problems in society. Education here is tasked with solving social problems that occur in society in the form of renewal and improvement of education. Various attempts have been made to improve the quality and quantity of education with the aim of keeping pace with the current advance in science and technology. Education is a complex activity and its implementation involves many parties, so that the result of education are influenced by various factors, either directly and indirectly. The second is Vocational High School. Vocational High School is an education institution that has complex activities, and its implementation involves many parties. Vocational High School is a vocational school that equips students to have the knowledge and skill to able to work in accordance with their competition. In addition, Vocational High School also prepare custom value that exist in the world of work to be given to students according to student interest. According to BPS data, the number of vocational high school in DKI Jakarta is 581 and as many as 224,600,000 students studying there. From the large number of vocational high schools and the large number of students in Jakarta, researchers are interested in accounting research at 46 vocational high school. This is 46 Vocational High School Jakarta. Stage 46 Vocational High School Jakarta has three expertise programs, namely Business and Management and Art, Information and Communication Technology, and Arts and Creative Industry, with 5 competencies of experts include Accounting and Financial Institution, Online Business and Marketing, Office Automation and Governance, Software Engineering, and Visual Communication Design. The Accounting Express program at 46 Vocational High School has 2 classes but for every class. In the Accounting Express program, there are a financial accounting subject which are productivity subject in the curriculum that must be studied by grade 11 and 12. The success of students in participating in financial accounting subject can be seen from the result of student achievement. According to BPS data, only 84,350,000 students can complete vocational education in the DKI Jakarta area. Even though the number of students received is higher, this is a very influential of student achievement. From the result of observation made in class 11 of the Accounting Express program at 46 Vocational High School Jakarta, there are 70 students or 21 students or 29% of students who score below the minimum complete criteria, namely 84. Well, in class 12, students will receive under minimum complete criteria as much as 100%. This means that the optimal learning achievement in financial accounting subject is proven if it is achieved using the minimal complicated criteria determined by 46 Vocational High School Jakarta. There are 144 students out of 93 students, or 65% of students who score below the minimum complicated criteria, namely 84. Last is learning achievement factor. According to Ngalim, learning achievement factor come from within student or internal, and from outside student or external. Internal factor include psychological factor and physical factor. Well, external factor include environmental factor and instrumental factor. Physical factor include talents, interests, intelligence, motivation, and cognitive ability. While physical factor include physical or sensory condition. Environment factor consists of the natural environment and the social environment. Well, the instrument factor consists of curriculum, learning material, teacher, evaluation tools, infrastructure, and school administration. Because of the background research, we will conduct under the title of the influence of the interest in learning, learning motivation, and emotional intelligence on student achievement in financial accounting subject in 46 Vocational High School Jakarta. The next slide is research question. With the background of the problem, the formulation of the problem is: first, is there an effect of learning interest on learning achievement? Second, is there an effect of learning motivation on learning achievement? The third, is there an effect of emotional intelligence on learning achievement? And the fourth, is there an effect of learning interest, learning motivation, emotional intelligence on learning achievement? Now then, namely the novelty of the research with private research. This difference between the study and private research is that lies in the object, the research, and the subject. In this research, the object of research to be examined in interest in learning, motivation to learning, and emotional intelligence on learning achievement. Well, the subject in the study were in Vocational High School 46 Jakarta. Next slide is purpose of the research. The first, to determine the effect of learning interest on learning achievement. The second, to determine the effect of learning motivation on learning achievement. Third, determine the effect of emotional intelligence on learning achievement. And the last, to determine the effect of learning interest, learning motivation, and emotional intelligence together on learning achievement. The next slide is chapter 2. In chapter 2, we are to discuss about theoretical study. In this chapter 2, I will discuss interest in learning, include definition, factor, and why to generate interest. Second is learning motivation, include definition, function, types, and why to drive motivation. The third is emotional intelligence, include definition, factor, and measurements of emotional intelligence. The fourth is relevant research result. The fifth is theory framework, and the last is hypothesis. In the next slide is learning interest. The first is definition. Umar Hamalik states that interest in learning will encourage students to learn better than learning without interest. Interests arises when students are interested in something because it is in accordance with their needs or feel that something to be learned feels meaningful from them. From the understanding of the opinion, interest in learning is closely followed by a sense of desire and interest in learning activity with pleasure without connection from any party. The second is the factor that affect in interest of learning. The factor that interest of learning is two. The first is internal factor and the second is external factor. Internal factor are factors that come from within student. Meanwhile, external factors are factors that come from outside of the student. Next is how to generate interest in learning. Interest in learning can be done by means of self-awareness of the student themselves and considering that interest in learning is very important for teaching. Besides that, it can also be done by making interest teaching material so the student don't go by the bored of learning. And the last thing to do the provide opportunity for students to determine the choice that are the interest of student. The next slide is learning motivation. First is definition. According to Hamzah B. Uno 2006, state that motivation to learn is an internal and external drive for students who are learning to make change in behavior, generally with several indicators or supporting elements. From the opinions, it can be concluded that learning motivation is the basic motivation to move a person to behave using feeling and reaction to achieve learning goals at school. Motivation to learn can play an important role in the learning process so that students can follow the process of learning activity. The second is the factor of influence student learning motivation. Function of motivation is a driving force, as a determinant of direction and as why to select an action. The function of motivation as driving force is to encourage individuals to achieve predetermined goals. Meanwhile, as a determinant of direction of the meaning, namely to determine the direction of the action to be carried out by the individual. And the last function is the end action selected, which means that it's an individual who wants to achieve the stated goal. The individual must see that action are needed to achieve his goals. The third is kind of a learning motivation. Motivation is divided into two, namely is intrinsic and extrinsic. This intrinsic motivation comes from within the individual, while the extrinsic motivation comes from outside the individual. Both of these motivations have an important role of the student to achieve their goals. The last is how to motivate learning motivation. In the why to learning motivation is the first is giving a number, the second is giving prize, the third is giving the punishment, and the last is purpose the education. The next slide is emotional intelligence. First is definition. Mustaqim 2004, emotional intelligence refers to ability to understand one's own feelings and the feelings of others, the ability to motivate oneself and in relationship to others. From the opinion of the experts above, it can be concluded that emotional intelligence is the ability to understand the feelings of oneself and others. Understand one's own feeling can be seen from how an individual manages his emotional in dealing with something. Meanwhile, understanding other people's feelings means that individual can empathy with other people's problems. In addition, it is also an individual encouragement to take action in a positive direction so as not to hurt the feelings of others. The second is the aspect of emotional intelligence. That aspect of emotional intelligence include recognition of one's own the emotion, recognition other people's emotion, managing emotion, motivation oneself, building relationship with others, and being able to make understanding to accept situation by relying on emotional understanding, which is one in additional. It can be concluded that someone who has empathy has ability to able to understand other people. And the last is can feels other people harmony in relationship with other individual. Third is how to measure emotional intelligence. According to Daniel Goleman, a person's ability to recognize other people or care so one's ability to empathize. Individuals who have the ability to empath are better able to pick up on hidden social signals that indicate what other people need so that they are more able to expect other people's points of view, are sensitive to other people's feelings, and are more able to listen to others. Based on the experts, it can be concluded that how to measure a person's emotional intelligence can be done by recognizing their own emotion, regulating and managing their own emotion, being able to recognize other people's emotion, and having a sense of empathy for others. The next slide is learning achievement. The first is definition. Saiful Bahri Jamara stage learning achievement is the result of education assessment of the progress of student after learning activity. Based on the opinion, can be concluded that learning achievement is assessment that carry out the process of student learning activity, where the assessment is carried out the student from the result of their assessment from not knowing to knowing after doing learning activity. The second is the factor of learning achievement. The internal factor include learning motivation, interest in learning, emotional intelligence, talents, intelligence, attitude, physical and psychology condition, and the external factor include school environment, family, community, facility and infrastructure in the school, teacher teaching method, and family or community condition. The last is the measurement of learning assessment. The first is cognitive domain. Cognitive domain, it can be see every development knowing of each student. The second is affective domain. The affective domain can be used to find out how to behavior and behavior its other student. The third is psychomotor domain. This psychomotor domain can be used to measure student skill based on the student behavior and completed assessment given by the teacher. Next slide is relevant research. Based on relevant research, it can be defined into the first effect of learning motivation, learning interest, and emotional intelligence on learning achievement. The research by Hengki Kurniawan 2016. The second is influence of learning interest and emotional intelligence on learning achievement. The research by Kabela Putri Rahmawati, Sutrisno Jaja, and Bambang Susiadi 2017. Second, Murtavia 2016. The third and Istiana 2019, and the last Indah Mayang Purnama 2016. The third is effect of learning motivation and emotional intelligence on learning achievement. The research by Firdaus Daud 2012. The second is Aswin, Jadir and Rusli 2019. The third is Eko Wahyu Nugrahadi and Agustina Rizky 2018, and the last by Mira Kusniawati and Eva Yuni Rahmawati 2019. The last is influence of learning interest and learning motivation on achievement learning by Sekar Anggahayu Laras and Ahmad Rifai 2019. The next slide is theory framework. The first framework is the influence of learning interest on learning achievement. According to Istiana 2019, interest has a big effect on learning outcomes because if the subject matter-based student is not accordance with the interest, student will not optimally learn. So student will not master the lesson. As a result of learning achievement will tend to be low. So it can be concluded that the interest in learning is a feeling of interest and desire that comes from within the individual for something that we want to know more deeply. The interest is directly related to oneself. The student interest is a form of interest and liking for a particular subject. The science of interest can be developed by students to find out more about the lesson, so that student can gain the expansive knowledge. This learning interest usually appears when there is student interest in certain subject and result in subject. By the following the learning process with a high interest. This is assumed that learning interest has an effect on learning achievement, so that when the student learning interest is higher, it is expected that learning achievement will be higher too. Second theory framework is the effect of learning motivation on learning achievement. According to Zulaihati, state that the material being student is assimilated and connected to knowledge that has been previously out. Motivation factor and emotional experience are very important in learning event because without motivation and desire on the part of the learning, there will not be assimilation of new knowledge into the cognitive store that they already have through student achievement. So it can be concluded that motivation to learn is an important to can be move individual to achieve a goal they have set. This motivation is something that is used to increase the spirit of the individual in achieving what he wants. This motivation plays an important role in the learning process because when student learning motivation is high, student will be interested in participating in the learn career. If a student has high learning motivation, the student will study hard, solve the question on time, fast learning with enthusiasm. This is that assume that learning motivation has an effect on learning achievement, so that when the student learning motivation higher, it is expected that the learning achievement will be higher too. The third theoretical framework is the effect of emotional intelligence on learning achievement. According to those thought, emotional intelligence affect positive and real towards learning achievement. That means that the more positive emotional intelligence, the higher the student achievement. So it can be concluded that emotional intelligence is the ability to control emotional possession by individual. Individuals who have good emotional control will be able to understand the emotion of themselves and the other. Students who have able to control their emotion will also have positive impact on brain performance. When the performance of the brain is good, students will be better and more positive in the receive the lesson give, and this can make easier for students to accept their learning. And it's not too easy to get bored when learning is taking place. This is the assume that emotional intelligence affect learning achievement, so that when the student emotional intelligence is higher, it is the assumption that the learning achievement will be higher too. The final theoretical framework is the effect of learning motivation, learning interest, and emotional intelligence on learning achievement. That interest in learning is an important factor in the learning process. Students who have a high interest in learning will have a high sense of seriously about the subject as well. This is a very influential on student interest. When students have learning interest, students tend to be more enthused and pay more attention to be learned given. Apart from learning interest, there is a learning motivation which is an important factor in learning. This motivation to learn can make the student take part in learning without delaying their study time. Students who have high learning motivation have a positive effect in following the extended learning. There is emotional intelligence, which is the ability to control and use emotion that an individual has. In this case, when students are able to use their emotional well, they will be able to control the action they like. This is important for the learning process because when the student can control their emotion properly, the student will find it easier to expect learning that being done. So it can be concluded that learning motivation, interest in learning, and emotional intelligence can have a positive effect on student achievement. Based on the theory framework that has been described, it can be described as shown in the picture below. Next slide is hypothesis. Based on the study of theory and theoretical framework that has been described, the hypothesis and a temporary answer to the problem faced is the first. There is influence positive learning interest on learning achievement. The second is there is positive effect of learning motivation on learning achievement. The third is there is positive effect of emotional intelligence on learning achievement. And the last is there is positive effect of learning interest, learning motivation, and emotional intelligence on learning achievement. The next slide is chapter 3 regarding research methodology. And the next slide is design research. In this study, researchers used a method survey with a regression approach. The method was survey choose because it collected information from respondents using a questionnaire. Then the research used descriptive statistical data analysis with a quantitative approach. The next slide is place and time of research. First is place. This research the place in 46 Vocational High School Jakarta, which is location B7 Cipinang Pulau, Jatinegara, East Jakarta. The second is population. The population of this research is student class 11 and 12, 46 Vocational High School Jakarta. The third is sample. The sample of this research is student class 11 and 12, 46 Vocational High School Jakarta. The last is time. The time of the research is January 2021 to March 2021. Next slide is methods, population, and sampling. The first is the method. Method is analysis of descriptive statistical data with a quantitative approach. The second is the population. According to Sugiono, population is generalization area consist of the object or subject that have certain qualified and characteristics that are determined by the researcher to be studied and the draw conclusion. Can be seen based on the table image, there are as many as 144 population. The third is the sample. According to Sugiono, sampling is part of the number and characteristic possessed by that population. This study used sampling by means of proportional random sampling. Proportional random sampling is taking member of the sample from the population randomly and proportionally. The sample in the study was developed from Isaac and Michael with an error rate of 5%. Then it can be seen that the number of samples in the study were 105 samples. The next slide is data collection technique. The first is learning achievement. Basic conceptual definition. Learning achievement is how students succeed in achievement by determining goals in the form of the ability to acquire knowledge, skill, and attitude as measured by test instruments and other instruments. Learning achievement has three domains to assess the success to be achieved, namely the cognitive, affective, and psychomotoric domain. Next is operational definition. This research used the 12 measures that questionnaire. Learning achievement have affective, cognitive, and psychomotoric. Learning achievement can be seen from the cognitive aspect seen in the profiles of score for the knowledge section with a score range of 1 until 100. From the affect aspect seen in the giving of the report score for the attitude section with the description assessment. And the last is psychomotoric aspect is seen in the scoring for the skill section report cards with a range of score value 1 until 100. The next slide is learning interest. The first is conceptual definition. Learning interest is the science of interest and desire that students have to know something deeper. In this case, it is to know financial accounting subject in more detail and can follow learning with attachment. Hack and happy without any prevention completion. Learning interest can also be in the form of the encouragement for achievement and love for financial accounting subject. Next is operational definition. This study used a questionnaire measure tool. Indicator of interest in learning include student interest or desire, student interest, student activity, and student understanding in learning. Students who have an interest in learning have characteristics, namely is a tendency to be more active in following something of interest, a feeling of liking for this subject, and pay attention to learn when the lesson is carried out. High learning interest in the student will result in optimal learning achievement that they will get. The next slide is motivation learning. First is conceptual definition. Motivation is an encouragement to move students to behave using feelings and do something they like. This learning motivation is one of the important factors for students to achieve optimal learning achievement, because with the learning motivation, students will be motivated to achieve the goals of they have set. The second is operational definition. Learning motivation has indicator of student awareness, the desire of students to have a good grades, always doing assessment, not only boring and has a goals. Motivation to learn is student usually has characteristic. Example is words in learning having high creativity in the lesson they like, the desire to have good grades in the lesson they like, have definitely goals, complete text according the deadline that have been given, not easily bored in the learning that they carry out, and has high attachment in the doing text to the maximum. High learning motivation in the student can the result in class learning achievement that are honored by the student. The next slide is emotional intelligence. The first is conceptual definition. Emotional intelligence is an ability in which a student can understand his or her own emotion and feeling as well as others. Students who have a good emotional intelligence will avoid the burden of stress because the students are able to foster interest and motivation so that they become better. When this happens, the student thinking ability will be optimal so that his learning achievement will be increased. Next is the operational definition. Students who have a good emotional intelligence have characteristics. Example is the ability to recognize themselves and their self. Next is to able control themselves from frustration and anger. And the next is be able to counter their emotions so that when they can more productive. And the next is able to understand the feeling of the other. And the last is his ability to relate to other people. Next slide is measurement scale. Measurement of data over the variable x and y is done by a giving score for its answer from the question or statement in the questionnaire. The scoring in the study used a scale Likert. The Likert scale in the study used only 4 alternative answers. The form of the scale is Likert as follows. The first is called alternative answer to learning instrument and learning motivation. The second is alternative answer to emotional intelligence instrument. The next slide is validity and reliability. The first is validity. According to Suharsmiri Arukunto, validity is a measure that shows the validity level of an instrument. An instrument is said to be valid if it can reveal data from the variables under study appropriately. This research combined the calculator error value with the error table with the significant level of 5%. The study used correlation formula product moment namely like this. Next is Reliability. According to Swarjana, reliability is an instrument used as a data collection tool. The study used the Alpha-Cronbach's formula as follows, like this. The correlation coefficient value is positive. It means that the values of then the other variable go up and vice versa if one variable goes down. The other variable goes down too. If the correlation coefficient is negative, it means that if one variable goes up, the other variable will go down, and vice versa if one variable goes down, the other variable will increase. The next is data analysis technique. Because this research uses a quantity approach, the data analysis technique uses statistical data. Data analysis is the study use regression analysis technique. Program SPSS version 22, which is used to assist to data analysis process. The analysis technique used in the research is as follows. The first is multiple regression analysis. Analysis regression analysis is your determinant of the known relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Multiple regression analysis is also used to determine in inverse of two or more independent variable on one dependent variable. The formula is like this. The second is technique in the analysis requirement test, which consists of 4 normality tests and linearity tests. The first is normality test. According to Hartman, that normality test is statistical data test to see whether the distribution of numerical data is normally distribution or not. These tests aim to determine the distribution of data in the variable used in the research conducted. With the statistic hypothesis, HO is a sample from a population with a normal distribution, while HA is a sample from a population with abnormal distribution. The second is linearity test. According to Marzuki, linearity test is used to confirm whether the linear nature between two variables in the theoretical agree or disagree with the result of the observation which exists. This linearity test serves to see whether the significance of the model used is correct or not. The third technique of the hypothesis is constraint of the phi hypothesis and t hypothesis. The first is t hypothesis test. The partial regression collected test or t-test aims to determine whether the regression model, the independent variable or x, parallelly has a significant effect on the dependent variable or y. The fifth hypothesis test is the simulation regression coefficient test or phi test is used to determine whether the independent variable or x together has a significant effect of the dependent variable or y. The fourth technique is the determined coefficient test. Determined coefficient test is used to measure the ability of the regression model explaining the variation of the independent variable. The value of the coefficient of determinant ranges from 0 to 1, which described is partition size. A small or quadrat value means that the ability of the independent variable to exploit the variance of the dependent variable is limited. Meanwhile, a value close to one independent variable provides almost all the information needed to participation values of the independent variable. Okay, that is the presentation I can deliver. If I have mistakes, I'm so sorry. And thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.